Well, I believe we are live. Good afternoon, good afternoon, good afternoon. Um, I am Reverend Jeremy McCants. I serve as the Minister of Prophetic Justice at the historic Allen Temple Baptist Church, as well as the co-chair of the public ministry. And that's who we are, and that's who we are. And as we are hosting this moment to really dive deep into the Reparations Task Force, their final report. The report is in. So we are so grateful that you all have been attuned and, in spirit with us as we have been on this journey to really lead the country in these conversations around reparations for Black folks. So we are just so grateful to my co-chair, Dr. Ali Whitehurst, and to all those who are joining us, and in partnership with the Oakland NAACP and the Oakland African American Chamber of Commerce. We bring you greetings. We greet you in the name of Jesus Christ, in the name of love, of faith, and of liberation. So we hope that you have been able to enjoy some of this beautiful, beautiful weather here in the Bay. We know that is not the case for everywhere else in this country. So we are just so delighted to be here and to have this conversation. So I also bring you greetings on behalf of our senior pastor, the Reverend Dr. Jacqueline A. Thompson, who sends her love and greetings at this time as well, and who, of course, is a voice and an advocate for reparations and just the liberation of Black folks here in these yet to be United States of America. So we are a church, we are a faith-based entity, and we know that through God, everything is possible. So I just want to make sure, yes, we have our cluster leader here at Allen Temple of our congregational care, Reverend Theophilus Regans, who is going to lead us in scripture and in prayer. So I pray and toss it over to Reverend Theo.
Good morning, Reverend Jeremy. Thank you very much. I'm going to read from Isaiah 61. I want to say before I begin that I very much appreciate the work that the ministry has been doing for a number of years, but recently it has intensified. You guys are doing wonderful work, and very proud of you and very gratified that you're doing this work and doing such a good job. And on behalf of the senior pastor and the Pastor Emeritus, I welcome all of our visitors. Thank you for joining us, taking the time to talk with us and keep us educated. And thank you for your servant warrior efforts. May God continue to encourage, strengthen, and empower you. Psalm 61. The Spirit of the Lord God is upon me, because the Lord has anointed me. He has sent me to bring good news to the oppressed, to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives and release to the prisoners, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor and the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all who mourn, to provide for those who mourn in Zion, to give them a garland instead of ashes, the oil of gladness instead of mourning, the mantle of praise instead of a faint spirit. They will be called oaks of righteousness, the planting of the Lord to display God's glory. They shall build up the ancient ruins. They shall raise up the former devastations. They shall repair the ruined cities, the devastations of many generations. Strangers shall stand and feed your flocks. Foreigners shall till your land and dress your vines, but you shall be called priests of the Lord. You shall be named ministers of our God. You shall enjoy the wealth of the nations, and in their riches you shall glory. Because their shame was double and dishonor was proclaimed as their lot, therefore they shall possess a double portion. Everlasting joy shall be theirs. May God add a blessing to the reading and hearing of God's word. God, we thank you for this opportunity to talk and fellowship and discuss issues of such importance to our community and to the entire country. God, we thank you for all of those who have gathered to engage and participate in this discussion, for those who have gathered to hear and to listen. I ask, oh God, for your presence in this moment. Please fill us with your love. Please fill us with your power. Please fill us with your wisdom. Open our hearts and our minds that we may hear and understand each other, and that we will hear from you. We thank you, Lord, for this opportunity. We thank you for this privilege. And I pray for a special prayer of empowerment for all of those who are serving and standing on the wall. In the mighty name of Jesus, I pray. Amen, and thank God.
Amen, amen, and thank God. Thank you, Reverend Theo, for that centering, for that scripture, and just reminding us of why this work is so important, and why, we are to be attuned and in the midst of everything that's going on in our world. So thank you for that scripture and prayer. So we will move forward in our agenda. We want definitely to get into the meat of the agenda. So next I'm going to introduce and present to others Rowena Brown, who is serves with me, Assembly Member Mia Bonta, and who is doing some amazing work. So I'm going to introduce her, and she is going to bring us remarks on behalf of Assembly Mia Bonta. But Rowena Brown was born and raised in the San Francisco Bay Area. She is an alumni of Peralta Community Colleges and Mills College, where she obtained a BA in political science. While completing her senior thesis, she researched and developed a comprehensive strategy on why the United States owes African Americans reparations. Rowena also served as an advocate for change while serving as the ASMC Vice President and Social Justice and Diversity Chair. As a result of her dedication to teaching the importance of civic engagement to youth in Oakland public schools, she was awarded the Changemaker of the Year award. Rowena has worked for local government in the city of Oakland, working to improve the lives of East Oakland residents during the global pandemic. Rowena now serves as District Director for Assemblymember Mia Bonta, representing us in the California State Legislature. She recently graduated from the University of California Law, San Francisco, class of 2023. So again, I introduce to some and present to others Rowena Brown, who comes to us giving remarks from Assemblymember Mia Bonta. Rowena, I'm tossing it to you.
Excellent. Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you so much, Reverend McCants, for that lovely introduction. I would first start by saying I am beyond honored to be in this virtual space with all of you. Hello to community. Hello, spiritual leaders and teachers and fellow panelists. As mentioned, my name is Rowena Brown, and I currently serve as District Director for the Office of State Assemblymember Mia Bonta. And she represents all of us in Oakland, Alameda, and Emeryville at the state capitol. And she's been serving in this capacity since 2021, and I alongside her since that time. And although she could not be with us today, she sends her warm greetings and will be visiting Allen Temple upon her return with the family very soon. And so, as you know, we are here to discuss the incredible news, reparations for African Americans and its next steps in the state of California. And so I will start first by giving some brief background on the reparations journey and provide an update on the task force recommendations, its content, and an overall outline for moving forward in 2024. Additionally, while I'm sharing out information, our amazing office interns, Tyler and Trinity, should be able to drop some useful links into the chat. Hopefully the chat can be enabled. Also on note, our office will be completing our bi-weekly newsletter in the coming days that will provide these updates given today, also in written form. So let's start from the beginning. We cannot begin the story legislatively without mentioning the work of the Honorable Congresswoman Barbara Lee, who moved forward with HR 40 at the federal level multiple times since 2017. And it's really with that legislation that she put in motion the studying of truth and reconciliation for all descendants of slaves here in America. And this is still an action item at the national federal level. And so, of course, here in the state of California, back in 2017, the then Assembly Member, Dr. Shirley Weber, brought forth legislation, AB 3121, that was enacted September of 2020, excuse me, and it established a task force to study and develop a reparations proposal for African Americans, the Reparations Task Force. And so in addition, the California Department of Justice, the DOJ, was tasked with providing administrative, technical, and legal assistance to the task force under the leadership of our Attorney General, Rob Bonta. The 9-member task force set out in 2020 with the mission to form recommendations on how California could repair the harm from centuries of systemic racism and the legacy of slavery. And so California became the first state in the nation to develop out a robust public discussion on reparations. And so with over 200 hours of public meetings, the task force traveling across the state, hearing public testimony and opinions and recommendations of community members, and thousands of pages of public documents were written, and a robust team of lawyers researched and developed recommendations for ways the state of California can begin the repair work for African Americans. And so then on June 29th of this year, Assemblymember Bonta and other members of the California Legislative Black Caucus received this over 1,000-page report filled with actionable items to move forward with legislatively. Trinity and Tyler, if you can drop the link to the report in the chat, that would be phenomenal. And so here in our office, we have begun to dive into chapters 19 through 30 that offers a very comprehensive report on recommendations to the California State Legislature. Therein, we find multiple ways for reconciling the systemic harms inflicted on the African American community. Some of its chapters include Chapter 20 on racial terror, Chapter 21, political disenfranchisement, Chapter 22, housing segregation and property takings, Chapter 27, addressing stolen labor, Chapter 28, addressing the unjust legal system, and Chapter 30, addressing the wealth gap. Some of the detailed recommendations include amendments to the California Constitution that would put an end to involuntary servitude, basically dissolving the remnants of slavery and the continued cause of racial inequality in our state. The task force also recommended actual compensation for incarcerated individuals for their labor by paying them a wage that is equivalent to fair market value. These recommendations also would apply to those who are serving time like in county jails or prisons. Under political disenfranchisement, a simple solution, declaring Election Day a paid state holiday and providing support to essential workers and increasing access to the polls. Under housing inequality, provide restitution for racially motivated takings, provide property tax relief. And under addressing the wealth gap, the task force suggests conducting an economic study to calculate the overall wealth gap. And this would further serve to inform actual monetary calculations in the form of reparations for African Americans. And so upon review, some of the top priorities of Assemblymember Bonta include a guaranteed income program for descendants of slavery, education equity, an end to the under protection of African American women and girls, a robust freedom school program, rehabilitation and reentry services such as housing and workforce development for our previously incarcerated community members, actual prison closures, community wellness centers, and an increase in green spaces and recreational opportunities in African American neighborhoods. And so lastly, I really want to uplift this clear message that members of the task force relayed and members of the California Legislative Black Caucus uplifted, that please don't just take our words for it as far as what the report says, but to actually read and study the report for yourself so that we're all in alignment and have a really clear understanding of how to move forward. And so I really appreciate the time that you've allowed me to offer up this informational report on behalf of Assemblymember Bonta. And, please do not hesitate to contact myself or the team as we are working on behalf of all of you. And, I'll stay here on the line to answer any questions that may come up. Thank you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, Rowena, for that information and for, just being who you are and showing up in this space and for all the work that you are doing and will do in regards to all that you do. So we are just, I know it's going to be a lot of information today. So I hope you all have a good notepad, good pen, good ballpoint pen. Take some good notes if you haven't been tracking already. So we are going to move forward. I'm going to make a pivot. We've been making some pivots already on this beautiful Saturday. But hey, we pivot under pressure. That is one of our mottos. So we were going to formally read all of the bios to make sure you know who's on this call and the power that is on this call. But I'm going to allow each of our panelists to introduce themselves in their own way before they give their responses or however the agenda leads. But Chris Lodgson of CJEC is going to be navigating us through the meat of our agenda. So I'm going to toss it to Chris to introduce himself and then let the Spirit lead us in conversation. Brother Chris, it's on you.
Yes, sir. And thank you, Reverend Jeremy. It's so good to see y'all. It's so good to see y'all. And to people who I can't see in the audience, thank you for being here. It's over 80 plus people here. Thank you so much. I appreciate you for taking your time on a Saturday afternoon to do something that's very important, which is work for reparations. And yes, this is part of the work. What we're doing today is part of the work. We're raising awareness and we're building support for reparations. And we are preparing for what's coming next, which is what will be the country's and the state's first ever state level reparations task force bill and then law in 2024. I'll talk more about that very, very soon. I am Chris Lodgson. I am the lead organizer and president of CJEC, Coalition for a Just and Equitable California. So far as we know, we are California's first and only statewide grassroots organization just born for reparations. That's all we do is reparations and reparative justice. So stuff related to reparations. And we had the honor and the privilege and the pleasure of working with folks you see on the panel today, folks like Maureen Simmons and Dr. Assemblymember then in 2020, now of course, California Secretary of State, Dr. Shirley Weber, to help write the final version of the law that created California's first in the nation reparations task force, as was mentioned by our good friend Rowena Brown from Member Bonta's office. That law is called AB 3121, Assembly Bill 3121. I would Google that and read that too, among the other things that you're going to be asked to read today, of course, including the final report of the State Reparations Task Force. In 2020, we then helped, after helping to write the final version of the law, we then helped to pass the law and get the law signed into law by our current governor, Gavin Newsom. We have been doing a bunch of community work, including community meetings, community town halls, canvassing, flyering, social media, all kinds of stuff, helping to raise awareness around California reparations. And we were selected as one of the 6 or 7 community organizations that the California State Reparations Task Force asked to work to educate the public about California reparations. And we're here doing that now, and we're excited to talk about what's coming next. So that is a little bit about me. I want to stop there. It's a little bit about CJEC too. I want to stop there. I am an organizer, so I'm just going to say right now, even in the beginning, go to our website, cjec-official.org. It's in the chat, cjec-official.org. Learn more about what we're doing. Learn more about what's going on in California for California reparations. And get involved. And we'll talk about some more ways you can get involved very, very soon too. www.cjecofficial.org. Reverend Jeremy, I'll pass it back to you, and then maybe we can ask our panelists to introduce themselves.
Perfect. Yeah, Chris. Yeah, we can just hop right into it. I know that you're guiding the questions, so
Yeah,
if you
sure.
want to pose the first question, then before they respond, we'll ask the panelists to give us a brief introduction of what they want us to know about them, specifically in this moment. Sometimes we don't, want all the bio read. But yeah, so we'll give that liberty to our panelists, and that allows us to get to the questions a lot earlier too. So
let's do it. Let's jump right in. So we're going to start our discussion today with someone who I have known. I've had the privilege and the pleasure of knowing for many years now. And this is someone who I think in, 2019? I think it was 2019. This was the first person that I saw when myself and some of the other folks here in the Sacramento area walked into the offices of then Assemblymember Dr. Shirley Weber to talk about reparations. And that is none other than Maureen Simmons. So Maureen, I'm going to come to you. If you could just start us off with just a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Chris. And it has been 4 years this month. 4 years ago is when we connected in Dr. Weber's office. And so my name is Maureen Simmons. I struggle with a biography and titles, especially given the gravity of this movement, this moment, because I recognize that this moment is not about me. It's not about really who I am in my work. I think about all of the many generations that came before me, and that God would use me in such a huge way in this moment is very humbling to me. And because of that humility, I want to amplify that. I want to decrease, and I want to amplify that this is work that God started, and I'm just a vessel. Because to think about the fact that I sat in an office with no political aspirations, no political identity and or experience, the first in my family to go to college, and that within a matter of months of being in one of the premier institutions in our country, that I was in Dr. Weber's office, who I had never heard of. I didn't know who Dr. Weber was. Just a few weeks ago, before that, one of my classmates recommended her and said I should intern in her office. So when I think about how all of those things came together, it lets me know that it's greater than me. And so, I want to just pause and say, thank you, Lord, for using me in this moment. I have said it again and again and again, that reparations is a God idea, because I could never have imagined that I would go into that office and make a recommendation for reparations to Dr. Weber, that she would champion it, and then that we would be here at all. And in the amount of time that it took. Chris, you came into the office on day 2. I just made the recommendation the day before you walked into Dr. Weber's office, literally 24 hours when I made that recommendation and said I wanted to study reparations. I just wanted to study reparations. I wanted to know, what was possible. And the next day you were in the office, and I remember telling you, I got you. And yes, I remember saying, I got you, I got us. I understand the moment. I understand the gravity of the moment. And it was after speaking to you and me saying, I've got you, that I really, took this to prayer and began to just realize, like, God, this is huge. This is really huge. And the rest is history. We can get into.
Let's get into some of that history, because, so as an intern in Dr. Weber's office, and again, this is 2019, and we're talking summer. And as you mentioned, you met me on day 2 of your internship in Dr. Weber's office, and you were already on the reparations energy. You were already on the reparations wave, and you mentioned that you had done some, or were beginning to do at that time, some research. I think this is something that is not known a lot, and I would like for you to talk a little bit about what you uncovered in your early research about maybe even prior efforts at reparations in California. Can you talk a little bit about what you learned in some of that early research?
Yeah. So when I made the recommendation to Dr. Weber's legislative director, Anthony DiMartino, he gave me some guidance and he pointed me in the direction of some research that Dr. Weber's office had begun to do on the insurance and insurance policies that were taken out on children who were children of enslaved freedmen who were here in California. And I saw a website, and on that website, I looked at the many different policies, saw, the policies on children who were enslaved for they were white politicians. And that was really sad to continue to, I just saw policy after policy after policy with children who were 4, 5, 6 years old, who were house slaves. And at that time, the slave owners were politicians in different parts of California. And when I made that connection, then I began to start researching okay, how can we connect the dots? Because Dr. Weber said it needs to be connected to California, because it's not just about reparations from a national level, but how does that connect to California? So we had these insurance documents. Then I began to just go through the archives at Berkeley, leaned into Berkeley's libraries and started deep diving into whatever I could find about reparations and, historical reparations, California, slavery in California. I just kind of Googled everything in the library. And then I stumbled upon a law that had been passed in California in the early 2000s. There was an legislator in California who was in Los Angeles who had passed a law that UC Berkeley was to form a task force and study reparations. And so there was a piece of legislation that said there should have been a study of reparations well before there was a task force in 2020. And when I found that, I went to UC Berkeley and said, yo, Berkeley, what's happening? No one knew what was going on. I went to the DOJ and I said, hey, we have a standing law for the study of reparations. What has happened with that? There was not any indication that anyone had taken that legislation seriously at all. And that began the foundation for AB 3121, because then we had the California connection on top of, we knew that we had these insurance documents that told us that slavery existed in the time when California should have been a free state. I also uncovered other documentation that showed who the slave owners were, that there were politicians who were creating laws to keep freed Black men and women enslaved, and when they would escape or, really declare their freedom, they'd have to go to court and fight. And so we uncovered a lot of that historical context, and we used that as the foundation. But to see that there was a standing law that at that time, I want to say the law was probably almost a decade old. So it had been out there, and reparations should have been studied, that long ago. And that again just tells you, for me, I looked at that as okay, this is spiritual now. It was always spiritual, but that was even more so for me solidified.
Wow.
This was a time, and the time was now.
Wow. And I'm so happy you said that, because that is unknown history. That is, there was, and so for folks who are listening, what you just heard so eloquently was that there was a standing law on the books to study reparations in California 10 years or so before the creation of AB 3121. And it's through your work, Maureen, that work was uncovered. I want to fast forward a little bit with you, Maureen, here, because not only are you the original drafter of AB 3121, not only are you someone who has been a part of this from the very beginning, the motivation for the bill in the assembly member and now secretary's office, you are also the originator and the motivation for what became the Proposition 16 campaign, which was the campaign in 2020 to repeal Prop 209, or to allow for affirmative action in California. And affirmative action has been in the news very much so over the past really for the past couple of years, but definitely over the past month or so, as the Supreme Court effectively eliminated the last pieces of affirmative action. And so I really wanted to check in with you on this question and really ask you what your thoughts are on the connection between, well, first, what were your reactions to the Supreme Court decision? But really, I'm really interested to know what you think the implications for that decision are, or the connection to that decision is, and affirmative action generally are on reparations, and particularly reparations legislation as we look forward.
Yeah, great question. So first, when I heard about the Supreme Court's decision about affirmative action, like so many people, I was disappointed, of course. And but then I always lean into just where I am spiritually, and I always, look to God and say, okay, what's happening in this moment? And I really want to, bring that up, especially in this sort of conversation, because I want to leave us with hope. And I want to leave us with a sense that, it's truly not over, that sometimes when things like this happen, it's really a foretelling of what's to come. And so and at one point it discouraged me, but then when I really, thought about it, I was encouraged, because then I recognized the implications of that as it relates to reparations. And I'll tell you what I mean. But when we were going through the Proposition 16 battle here in California, we really were connecting that to reparations, because in California, that Prop 209, had some barriers and obstacles that it could create when we're looking at reparations, particularly in California. And but I remain steadfast, and I remain hopeful, and knowing that we're able to continue to move forward with the recommendations that the task force has presented. Now, as we look at what this will mean on a national level, when we look at HR 40, when we look at now, because of dismantling affirmative action, it means that you can't disaggregate race and then begin to, give distributions to one race or the other. So I think that means that as a community, we have to be very aware of what that means. Politically speaking, who are our political voices? We have to understand that, and we definitely need to hold our political representatives accountable, and those that are not, going to be accountable, then we need to make decisions on who we need to have. So I know that was kind of a roundabout way of answering it, but it really is, there's no clear answer, because there's so many connections, and I have like 3 minutes to answer that. So disappointed, but hopeful is my answer, but also recognizing that it's not over until it's over. And I truly walk into this. I think the reason, as I started at the top, when I said I didn't really have a sense of, my bio or where I stand, because I realized when I look at everything that's happening, for me, I started this journey in prayer. And for me, it's making me dig even more into prayer, because I realized the implications of dismantling generations of bondage. Some people don't want to let that go. And so it's going to take more than just our efforts at engaging politically. We're going to have to engage spiritually, probably even, not probably, but more so than that. So I hope when we leave this conversation that regardless of why you came to this panel today, if you don't leave with anything else that is said, I really implore you to spiritually consider the time that we're in. And even as we think about all that the task force has put together, let's not forget God, and let's not forget that it started with God, it will end with God. That is truly the message that I wanted to bring today.
Thank you. Maureen, I couldn't have said it better. You know, so well, first I want to say, for those who are listening and watching now, we will be taking your questions. So use the Q&A box and, you know, start thinking about and start sharing some of your questions and some of your thoughts and your ideas about what we're doing today. Maureen, I want to just pick up on a couple of things you said, and then I want to move us to speak to our next guest here. But so one, the State Reparations Task Force, is one of the recommendations in the final report is a repeal of Prop 209. So that's in the final report. Also, I'm sure you're very, very much aware, and I'm sure some of us are here too, that, you know, the State Reparations Task Force really thought hard about what Prop 209, what Proposition 209 would mean or could mean, what the ban on affirmative action could mean for any reparations legislation or any reparations recommendations, and brought on some legal expertise and some legal guidance and some constitutional thoughts on it, and you know, and has some ideas really about how to make Prop 209 not really stop what we're doing. And it's actually in that I want to transition to our next speaker here, who I think, you know, is someone that I have had the privilege and the pleasure and the blessing of working with over the past 2+ years now. You know, I want to, well, let me give this individual the opportunity to introduce herself. And then I want to circle back right around and pick up right where we left off on the conversation that Maureen was touching on around the implications of Prop 209 on any coming future reparations legislation. But first, Kamilah Moore, please tell the family who you are, and yeah, tell us who you are.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name's Kamilah Moore. I think this goes into like the first question that I think you proposed to me, like, who am I? And like, I'm trying to read it. Why did you get involved in the movement for reparations? What motivated you? So I'm just going to, you know, kill two birds with one stone, so to speak.
Come on.
Answer the first question with my introduction in brief. I just want to first give honor to God, like, you know, particularly in this space in terms of like, again, like Maureen said, why, you know, I'm involved in the movement for reparations, you know, growing up in a community, Leimert Park, growing up in a household that, you know, prided African-American history and culture. You know, I was a young child reading slave narratives, you know, just learning deeply about again, African-American history, concepts around 40 acres and a mule, again, from a very young age. I went to UCLA for undergrad, was the president of the Black Student Union there. You know, and then after that, 2014, that's when I graduated. I had a feeling that I wanted to go to law school, but I wasn't really sure. I took a gap year after graduating. I was a substitute teacher for LAUSD. So I was teaching like preschool all the way to even 8th grade for about a year or so, year and a half.
I did not know that.
Really? Yeah, it was wild, but I loved the experience. It was great. And then also during that time, substitute teaching, I applied to this pre-law fellowship that helped, you know, first generation or would be first generation law school students get into law school. You know, they paid for the LSAT test prep. They taught folks like, what does it mean to go to law school? What are the different careers that you can, you know, go through after you, you know, graduate from law school and become an attorney. So I do credit that fellowship for why I thought that law school was feasible for me. So that's why I applied. Fortunately, I got into Columbia, and I always knew if I got into law school, I wanted to try to use it as a tool, you know, in support of or in favor of reparations. So, you know, went to Columbia. They're known for international and human rights law. So I took a lot of courses, not only on civil rights, but human rights, studied abroad my 3rd year at the University of Amsterdam Law School. So I have my JD from Columbia, but a Master of Laws in International Criminal Law from the University of Amsterdam. And that's where I wrote, a thesis on global reparatory justice for people of African descent, but particularly focusing on Black Americans who descend from slaves, as well as Black Brazilians in Brazil and Black Colombians in Colombia. And then, I graduated from law school 2019, came back to California, where I'm from originally, from New York City. And then literally in 2020, Governor Newsom signs AB 3121 into law, and it was open to the public. Anyone could apply after it was signed into law. I applied to all 3 appointing officials to increase my chances, and I was appointed to the commission by the Speaker of the State Assembly, Anthony Rendon. So again, that's my story, but again, giving honors to God for it as well.
Okay, now you left something very big out, right? That first meeting, and so I have to full disclosure, y'all. CJEC made recommendations to the governor, to the Speaker of the Assembly, to the leader of the Senate. These are the 3 people who picked the members of the California Reparations Task Force. So the governor picked 5 of the task force members. The Speaker of the Senate at that time, Anthony Rendon, picked 2. And then the leader of the Senate, Tony Atkins, picked 2. And CJEC, our organization, we made recommendations to those folks saying, hey, these are people who we think would be great task force members. Kamilah was one of them, and we were very, very excited and happy when she got picked. But that first meeting, and this is what I wanted to touch on and make sure that we said, you were elected chair of the California Reparations Task Force. You were elected the first ever chair of the first ever State Reparations Task Force. I know I've said this a bunch of times, Kamilah. There's never been anybody like you. There's never been a chair of a State Reparations Task Force in U.S. history. So you are literally a first of a kind, a one of a kind. So just wanted to add that piece in there. And I actually wanted to pick up on something. I know I gave you all questions, but I'm gonna be flexible here and then come right back to it. But I want to pick up on something that we were just talking about with Maureen around upcoming reparations legislation, what the task force is proposing, and then also the impact of the affirmative action decision on what the task force proposals and legislation later for reparations could mean. And I know you have a really, I think, powerful and what I think is accurate take on what the impact or not impact of that is. And I know there was a story, I think it was in was it the Times or the Post or something like that over the past few days that sort of highlighted what you were thinking. So can you talk about what in your mind does the recent affirmative action decision mean to what the task force is proposing in its final report?
Sure. I think in brief, and I said this at the last hearing where we had a press conference kind of going over the final recommendations in the report, that by and large, even though you do have in our final report the recommendation to repeal Proposition 209, that's, one of over 100, recommendations, but by and large, most of our recommendations are and will remain to be unaffected by the Supreme Court's decision. Ironically, that was given the same day as the task force final hearing, in part because of the due diligence the task force did in terms of consulting legal experts, and I say this all the time, like UC Berkeley Law School Dean Erwin Chemerinsky, who was one of the expert witnesses that we invited to the task force before we decided on who should be eligible for reparations. And essentially in his expert testimony, he gave a very dispassionate one and stated, or predicted rather, the outcome of the Supreme Court decision, not, litigating the merits, but just purely predicting the outcome of the decision, which was to ban race-conscious admissions. And then also taking into light that in California, affirmative action or race-based preferences are already illegal in areas of education, contracting, and employment. So in brief, Chemerinsky just advised for the task force to adopt a lineage-based standard rather than a race-based standard. And particularly, he stated constructing reparations programs for the benefit of descendants of slaves, because it's facially a race neutral term, and it sounds perverse in some ways, but again, it's not. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And I'm glad you touched on this, because one of the questions that we get often is, hey, who's going to be eligible for reparations, right? And that answers that question too, right? It's those of us who are descendants of either enslaved or free Black Americans who were living in the United States before the year 1900, right? And that is, as you said, as you described it, facially race neutral. And so that would not, in theory, offend the Constitution. And that means that the proposals and the recommendations would be valid. I actually want to talk about one of those, I think, very, very valid recommendations that I know you had a very, very big part in proposing and in developing, and something that I think is very, very historic. I think there's never been something proposed like this. And that is the proposal to create a new state agency called the California American Freedmen Affairs Agency. So I would like for you, Kamilah, to just, if you could, generally describe the agency and then maybe talk about some of the different pieces and parts of it that you think are important.
Sure. So one of the final recommendations is the creation of a new state agency, tentatively called the California American Freedmen Affairs Agency. And we voted as a task force that this entity would not be simply an oversight body or commission, but it would be a full-fledged state agency that has dual purposes, but multiple purposes, but dual purpose in the sense that it will provide ongoing reparatory justice services to descendants of slaves in the areas of education, labor and employment, healthcare, cultural life like arts and culture. There will be an office of eligibility and genealogy that would house board certified genealogists to assist people process their eligibility claims. That would be the agency that would process state compensation or a guaranteed income program for descendants of slaves. This agency not only would provide those types of direct reparatory justice services to the descendant community, but it will also provide oversight over existing state agencies to essentially make sure that the quality of life of descendants of slaves are being improved and that our civil rights and liberties are not being infringed upon.
I love it. I love it. And this is, to me, historic. By the way, for the folks in the chat, thank you so much. Keep the questions coming. We got some great questions coming. Keep the questions coming. Thank you so much. And we are going to get to the, I think this is the only panel I've done in a while where we're actually ahead of schedule. So I'm going to slow down a little bit because we're actually doing very, very well on time. And Kamilah, I actually want to, so I want to stay on the recommendations. We just talked about what we call CAFA, CAFAA, the California American Freedmen Affairs Agency, as one of the recommendations that are in the final report of the Reparations Task Force. By the way, if you want to read that report, we highly encourage you to read that report or start reading it, because it's 1,000+ pages. So you want to start reading it. There should be links in the chat to take you to the report so that you can start reading it. Download it also and share it with someone too. Share it with someone you know in your life and start understanding and getting familiar with what the State Reparations Task Force is recommending. Again, there are over 100 recommendations for reparations in the report that the task force released. Kamilah, I want to stay on one of the recommendations that you mentioned also, which is direct compensation. I know it's not in the list of questions, but I want to come to it anyway, because I think it's really, really important. So the state task force is also recommending direct payments, direct compensation, monetary, financial, to descendants of persons enslaved in the United States. If you could, Kamilah, just talk a little bit about why that recommendation is important. You are on it. There you go.
Well, yes, now as someone who studied, international law and the intersections of that and reparatory justice, under international law through primarily the United Nations General Assembly adopted guidelines that inform countries and states on the international legal right to remedy and reparation for gross human rights violations. Under those guidelines, actually, the statement is you cannot call a reparations program a full and effective. Hence, you can't call a program actual reparations unless it includes all 5 forms of reparations under international law. And so compensation is one of those 5 elements of reparations under international law. It's a necessary component. You can't have one without the other 4. And just in brief, those other 4 are rehabilitation, restitution, satisfaction, and guarantees of non-repetition.
Thank you. I've been thinking about it as like the 4 or 5 elements of hip hop, right? You got the MCing, you got the DJing, you got the breaking. So there's 5 pieces to reparations, and the compensation. And we have a saying at CJEC: if it doesn't have compensation, it's not reparations. The direct compensation is, to me, core. The core of those 5 forms. And again, the state task force in the final report is recommending direct compensation in 2 levels, right, Kamilah? There's a cumulative level, and then there's a general level. So maybe we can help folks understand what that means too. So the state task force is recommending that those who are eligible receive direct compensation. The state task force, as Kamilah mentioned, is also recommending a guaranteed income program, which I think is very much connected to the direct compensation. The state task force is recommending that there be a down payment on your direct compensation, as well as prioritizing our elders in the direct compensation. And then also having 2 levels, and I see folks clapping for that, having 2 levels of direct compensation. So a general level, and then what I call a specific level. So Kamilah, I'm gonna try to explain this and tell me if I'm wrong, okay? So at the general level, everyone who's eligible, so as long as you meet the eligibility criteria, everybody will be receiving a general level of compensation, meaning just because you're eligible, you're going to get direct compensation. You won't have to show any proof of any particular type of harm. It's going to be assumed and presumed that because you are a descendant of someone who was enslaved in this country, that you live with the living, lasting legacy of that lineage in your life every single day. So you won't have to prove anything specifically bad happened to you. As long as you're eligible, as long as you are a descendant, you will be receiving direct compensation. That's the general level. Then there's a specific level. So for folks who have particular specific claims, particular specific things that they think and they believe they want and deserve direct compensation for, they will also be able to file particular specific claims for additional compensation on top of the general level of compensation. Kamilah, is that correct?
That's absolutely correct. That's perfect. Thank you.
Just wanted to make sure I got that. So I hope folks understand that. And that and all that information is, of course, available in the final report of the State Reparations Task Force. I think it's chapter 17 or chapter 18, if I'm not mistaken. Do go and look at the report. Also, I'll say one last thing on compensation before we move on and speak to our next guest here, So how do I say this, I think, in a way that makes the most sense? So we've seen a lot of media stories and stuff around, hey, this particular number is what folks are going to get. I was hearing, $225,000 last year, and then it went up to $250,000, and then it went up to $350,000, and now I'm seeing 1.2 million. And I like the direction. I like the fact that we're going up. However, folks should understand that the way the task force has described and recommended direct compensation, and Kamilah, correct me if I'm wrong here too, not everybody is going to be eligible for the same amount of compensation. Generally speaking, the longer you've lived in California, the more you'd be eligible for generally speaking, as long as you're eligible for reparations. So as long as you're eligible for reparations, generally speaking, the longer you've lived in the state of California, the more direct compensation you'll be eligible for. Is that also generally correct, Kamilah?
Yes, so eligibility is not based on whether you were born in California, which was one of the questions. They said, oh, their family migrated to California from Texas in 1959. So if you weren't born in California, that doesn't disqualify you. Direct compensation, as Chris said, is based on the period of time that you resided in the state of California during those atrocity areas that the task force identified were undergoing with state facilitation and participation.
And thank you. And I say you just raised a great other piece to the eligibility and other piece to the direct compensation recommendation as well. And thank you for the questions in the chat around this too. I think this is important to say also here, which is that there is also a residency piece to the eligibility too, right? So you would have to have resided in California for at least a particular time, or at least a minimum number of, I think it's 6 months if the last time I looked. So you'd have to have lived in California for at least 6 months. So, and this is to your point, Kamilah, you won't have to have been born in California, but you would have to have at least lived in California for at least 6 months. I think it's any time between the years of 1850 and 2020, as well as being a descendant of someone who was enslaved or free and living in the United States before the year 1900. That gets you eligible for reparations, and then how much you're eligible for, both on the general and specific level, would depend on how long you've lived in the state of California. Of course, prioritizing our elders for direct compensation, and of course, providing for a down payment for the direct compensation as well. This is one of the core recommendations of the final report. And again, please do read these and other recommendations in the final report. The link's in the chat, but you can also check that out on our website too, cjec-official.org/reports. Actually, if you just go to our website, if you stay on there for 2 seconds, a pop-up will pop up on you, and that pop-up will give you a link to the report as well. Okay. Keep the questions coming. Thank you so much. I love the questions in the chat. We're going to get to all the questions. And thank you to our team on the back end who are helping to answer some of the questions too. I want to move on to Mr. and Dr. Reverend Evans. So it's, I think, well, first, let me allow you the opportunity that I've allowed all our other panelists here. Please do tell the family here, tell the audience here a little bit more about yourself as well, sir.
Well, thank you, Christopher. And let me begin with your excellent ability to not only guide us, but you have institutional knowledge that is certainly helping all of us as you fill in the blanks. And I salute you, sir. And I salute you for your revolutionary spirit to get in front of this with your colleagues, the two attorneys, which I would like to start there, if I may. I am now the J. Alfred Smith Sr. Professor of Theology in the Public Square. So let us assume today we are in the public square. This is a public square event, which means theologically we want to persuade moral suasion of a larger audience about the merit of our cause and our movement, which of course is reparations for American descendants of slaves, and primarily, if I may. Notwithstanding, that requires for us to also have attorneys, as we have here today, because at the end of the day, what we've heard gives us insight into a legal decision must be made. The United States government is the perpetrator here. The American government permitted, sanctioned, allowed white supremacy as slave, and as the report that I'm reading, I'm actually reading, Christopher, the executive summary, and I began to read it, and because I'm an investigative reader, I have not finished it yet. But we wouldn't be where we are now without the moral suasion, but also the legal beagles who are able to get us into the court system and to impose our will upon a hostile government. So I would like to start there. I've read some of this report, and one of the keys that I wrote here is two things, and I'll let your attorneys actually address this perhaps later, or some other people who may know this. But one of the things that's important to me, in the very first paragraph, it talks about the taking responsibility for the structural racism that perpetuated these harms. That is, the African-American story, the saga of African-Americans has been one where race is the dominant discourse in America. It has been, and it will continue to be, because of the structures of racism, which points back to not only to the United States government, but to commerce and others who have empowered white supremacy. I define white supremacy as philosophical, political, and psychological, and you can fill it in from there. I think that is important to raise here at the outset. Now, as the J. Alfred Smith Chair, I'm also over the Center for Truth, Racial Healing, and Restorative Justice. And we have 4 A's. We always have A's, don't we? First A is alignment. We work with the aligning with the institution, vision and mission statements, excuse me. So that is to offer a disclaimer that there may be some things that Berkeley School of Theology cannot do, but we can certainly participate in helping other people reach those objectives. Second A is awareness. I wanted to say woke, but that ain't an A. So we are aware. We are aware and want to help people be aware of issues that intersect theologically and also with our everyday lives and how we are affected. So we want to be woke, but we are aware of those issues. And I would say, think of us as a think tank, right? Where we can come partner with you, for example. We learn from you, offer our institutional support so that we can have more of a broader and collective approach to these objectives, achieving these objectives. So that's the third A, that's our agency. We offer an agency. We can be a catalytic help to others in what we're doing. And then finally, access. Access for us is making sure that grassroots organizations, not only those of us who are on this call, but people, for example, in our local congregations, right? Pastors who may have the same spirit as the very intelligent people on this panel, but also they now have access through the center, frankly, and to you, right? So you have an army, so to speak, that you can mobilize when is necessary to gain more approach to this. And then I think finally, what I would share is 2 stories. Number one, my own family comes from the Bleak House Plantation in just outside of Charlottesville, Virginia. We can trace our family back to 1820. James Baber Rogers was the enslaver, and Mr. Rogers was a part of what you and I would know more out here in the West, part of the Rogers and Clark, the people who came out and colonialized indigenous people and brought slaves with them. And that is key, isn't it? They brought slaves across state lines into what would have perceived to be at that time territory that would have been free, particularly because I think California became a state in what, 1840, 1845. And so they were here before that. And so that's a legal issue that needs to be discussed. Meriwether Lewis was James Baber Rogers' wife, was the daughter of Meriwether Lewis of Lewis and Clark. So you got Rogers and Clark, Lewis and Clark, and we come from the Bleak House Plantation. Now, it is important, I think, for all who are on this call, you can start looking at your family's history by going to local historical societies. Everyone has one. Virginia as a state has a very good one. And there are other states that do as well. If you have any names of any persons from oral presentation, oral history from your family, you are then able to go and perhaps find who the enslavers were. And it usually has to be in a census. For example, in our family, we have copies of census where my great-great-grandmother, Mariah, and my great-great-great-grandmother, Hannah, were two women on that plantation, and their names show up in the census around 1840 or so. So you can look for your family that way, and it connects you into how to access the credibility and the credibility and verification of who your family's members are and what you may be owed in general. There's one last thing I want to share, and then I'll be available to you. People often talk about, and the first speaker, the no, it wasn't Mrs. Brown, Attorney Brown, and it wasn't Kamilah Moore.
Maureen?
Yes, she talked about the spiritual aspect to this, which kind of opened the door for me to share this. And this is in one of my own books. I wrote about this, and I've tried my best to lift this in pulpits as I go. And let me see if I can locate it in verse, here it is. In the book of Exodus, or the Hoda, the road out. The word Exodus just simply means the road out. In Exodus chapter 12, verse 35. And this is important. I think I heard Attorney Moore talking about international law, which brings up the Jewish successes in reparations. And of course, we know that in some cases, Japanese in California, for example, were awarded rightly, frankly, reparations. And of course, in some cases, indigenous members of the so-called United States have been awarded reparations. The only people who have not been awarded reparations are people of African descent, and notwithstanding, not only here, but wherever our feet have been placed, where Eurocentrism is the dominant narrative, we have been overly policed, incarcerated, underpaid, and we are owed reparations. But because of the international piece that Attorney Moore brought up, chapter 12 of Exodus, this is what it reads. Now the sons of Israel had done according to the word of Moses, meaning that they were leaving the bondage and preparing to cross the Red Sea. For they requested from the Egyptians, here it is, they requested from the Egyptians articles of silver and articles of gold and clothing. Yeah. And the Lord, namely Yahweh, had given the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, so they let them have their requests. Thus they plundered the Egyptians. So for anyone to tell us that it is irrational, it is there is no priori, there is no precedent for reparations, both here in this country or internationally, it's right in here in the Hebrew Bible that they left with reparations. This is nothing new. It is justice now for us. And so I end by something that I know it's something, I hear it and I think of it often. It may have been Faulkner, The past is never the past. It's not even the past. Even if an event is in the past, it still can affect and influence the present and the future. So I sum it up by saying race remains the dominant oral and written American discourse that points to the American narrative and the American psyche. When Black people receive reparations, it will free other people from their demons, their dysfunctions, their psychological failures. It will free them from the pain that they're in because the enslaver and the enslaver's ancestors are still sick.
Dr. Evans, so first of all, thank you. And one of the questions I was going to ask you too was around, what is the power in truth and truth telling, as it relates to your work at the Center for Truth, Racial Healing, and Restorative Justice, but also want to connect that to something that Attorney Brown talked about, Rowena Brown talked about earlier today, around the bill that Barbara Lee, Congresswoman Barbara Lee, introduced around truth and reconciliation, and then I was also going to ask you, about what the Bible had to say about reparations, and you answered all of those questions in once. I want to thank you. I think one of the pieces of the Bible that I really like that talked about reparations, and I think Kamilah, I think it's one of your. So I've seen you say it too online. I think it says, fools mock at reparations, but among the upright there is favor. Mm-hmm. And I think it's important. I actually want to ask you, Dr. Evans, and really it's a pickup on one of the questions that's already in the chat, and it comes from someone that we know and work well with at CJEC. It's one of our colleagues, Raphael Plunkett, who asked, while we are working with allies to educate the public, how can we reach those who are ambivalent or those who are opposed to educate them? And I want to pose that to you, Dr. Evans, and also twist it a little bit and really target it to our faith community, and really ask you, what are some of the things, what are some of the ways that you think that we can do better with, or to raise awareness and then build support among our faith community toward and for reparations?
Thank you. That's a very good question. Let me begin this way at a 30,000-foot level. What we need to do is to, as you are doing, this event is absolutely doing what I'm getting ready to suggest, and that is to rewrite the narrative. The narrative has to be a justice motif narrative, right? If you want to use biblical language, we've just heard, before I have spoken, we have heard at least 3 Esther's, Deborah's, right? We've heard them today, right? Right now, right? We have heard in my business a womanist theology, right? To bring us into the now, right? So that's part of it. That's at a high level. So we have to recreate the narrative. The narrative is, we've heard majority of our lives why we should not be talking about justice motifs, why we should not have reparations. Well, it's because we've been given a supremacist narrative. And so we have to create a counter narrative, a meta narrative, and then just our narrative. In other words, we don't really care about what you say. We demand what we are owed right now in this space and this time. So that's part of it. The other part of it is, part of what I'll be doing is working, frankly, with local pastors here in California. We'll have an event actually in September here on this campus where we're expecting 100 of our Bay Area pastors on this campus, where we will be addressing majority of these issues. Well, I won't say majority, it'll be too much for the time, but specifically what we're talking about right now, 100. We've enlisted 100 on the East Coast, right, to talk about these issues. So we are looking at 200 church pastors, and we believe it'll continue to grow because we have to talk about these types of issues. Secondly, it is all women and men on deck. So you don't have to be a person from my religious tradition, which I value to my death and to my resurrection. But if there are brothers and sisters from other traditions that share the common goal of justice for our people, I want to talk to them too, right? Yeah, I need to talk to them because we're going to have to build a broad coalition around issues that matter to our humanity, right? And so we're going to be working in those areas as well. So it's changing the narrative. It is also creating a different biblical or theological worldview for many of us. we can no longer preach white sermons in blackface. We can't do that. Because Spoonie on the corner actually knows the difference. Spoonie knows that what we're doing is not helping Spoonie deal with his realities, right? And sometimes those of us in the house are not aware that we are reinforcing self-hatred. So we have to deal with that, right? So those are some of the things that we can do that are right here before us, in front of us, and obtainable.
Thank you. And actually, I want to just pick up on something that you said. One, please do, I'm going to speak for CJEC here just for the moment. We would love to learn more about the opportunities coming up as you're convening pastors both here on the West Coast and on the East Coast. So please do share that information with us, but also please do share that information with as many folks as possible, because I think one of the answers to the question which you just spoke to is that it takes folks like yourself to help organize other folks in your tradition, but also to reach out to and to connect with and to convene folks from other traditions. Also, one of the things that I think I want to see more of over the next definitely 6 months to the next year or so is a multi-faith effort. We've already had some direct connection with folks in the Jewish faith and folks with folks in the Muslim faith too. I want to see more of that. And so, I think that's something that we will be doing definitely over the next 6 months to the next year or so. And I want to pivot more to some of the questions and start going into more of the questions that you are asking in the chat. Again, thank you so much for these amazing questions. I'm not going to take them in exact order. I'm going to try to get to all of them as possible, but I want to pose one question to you here, Kamilah, which I think is about the agency itself, specifically about the Freedmen Affairs Agency, which is, again, one of the recommendations of the State Reparations Task Force in the final report. Again, to read the final report, check out the links in the chat. You can also go to our website, cjec-official.org/reports, and read the reports there too. And I would humbly ask that our good friends at Allen Temple Baptist Church possibly consider providing a link or a resource to the final report on their website. Also, we can definitely follow up on that. But to you, Kamilah, the question is, let me come back to it. So it's about the agency. And the question is, who will decide who serves on the agency's design to ensure that our liberties are granted? And what would be the application process?
Sure, yeah. Actually, I was gonna punt that to you because I saw that question in the chat. And I mean, I feel like the task force, we definitely contemplated that, but when we talk about like what's actually in the final report, I don't think there's any final recommendations as to who is going to decide who works in the agency. But there is in the report, particularly in chapter 17 on direct compensation, like a brief overview of what an application might include. But I think my answer to that question in terms of who would be doing the hiring for this agency or what an application would look like, generally speaking, for compensation, I think that's something that will have to be clearly laid out in this legislative phase that we're in the actual legislation for this said agency for cash payments, using what's in the task force's final report as a guide.
Thank you. And yeah, and I'll pick up on some of that too. Yeah, I actually plan to answer some of this or parts of this too, because it's a really good question. And again, the question is who will decide who serves on the Freedmen Affairs Agency, which is one of the recommendations, and what will be the application process. So the answer in short is to be determined. And this is really, I think, an important point to make here. And I'm going to say more about this in my closing remarks before I turn it back over to our hosts. But there is a lot of details to be decided and determined next. And the task force for reparations, which worked for the last 2 years, developed a series of recommendations and then have given those recommendations to the state Senate, to the state assembly, and to the governor for consideration for reparations legislation. And so a lot of those details are still to be determined. And so for the folks who are asking questions and also listening and thinking, some of the answers to these questions are going to come from you. And so I'm curious who you think should be in charge of hiring and who you think, and what you think the application process should be. That is just as important, what you think as what the task force recommended, and then also what the legislature is going to be saying and thinking about it too. So I want to go to some of our next questions here. We got a bunch of questions in the chat. Again, please do keep the questions coming. We want to hear as many questions and as many thoughts as you have. There's a bunch of sort of technical questions about transcripts of the town hall. I'm assuming the town hall is going to be recorded or is being recorded, and the recording will be distributed. So just heads up on there. So I'm gonna go to some of the other questions here. By the way, there's a question for you, Dr. Evans, about the event in September, and folks are asking, is that event only available for pastors?
Well, I tell you, I can certainly bring people in who may not be pastors, but let me say you this. I will provide for all of you through this medium opportunities. For example, in October, we're going to have another meeting with a judge, a very important judge who works in restorative justice here in the Oakland area. And we're going to be talking about criminal justice reform and how that has penalized us as a people, with obviously over-policing and nefarious charges to keep us in the system, what it means to be a felon. And may I just say this, Chris, very quickly, one of the things that
Sure,
I've heard that it baffled me when I was a very, very young man was, how can a person born of African descent in America, whether rightly or wrongly, are put into some kind of institution, she or he is a citizen in the United States, they come out of prison where they have already given their time to society, then why isn't their voting rights rightly restored immediately after they're out of the penal system? And then there are people who come here illegally. You may or may not like it, but they come here illegally. And I'm not interested in getting into whether I support Browns coming here. I do. But what I'm getting at is, they are in the front of a line for full citizenship, for breaking laws to come. And then we are here by birth and we've been penalized. We pay our price, but they stop us from voting. So that's a reparations piece, because that takes a lot of economic viability out of the homes of people who have suffered the loss of their people. So we see the intersection between incarceration and immigration. So we will be addressing that in October. I think that's October 19th. I'll be sure to get that to you. And then in April of 2025, April of 2024, I think it's around April 19th, but I'll get it to you. William Darity is coming here. And his wife, Kirsten Mullen, will be here to promote and talk to us about their books, From Here to Eternity, and other book, Here to Equality, not Here Eternity. That was a movie, wasn't it? And so we'll get you the calendar. And that's why I'm asking folks, please, I put my email address in the chat, jevans@bst.edu. If you send me your name, I'll make sure you're on our newsletter list. I'll make sure that you're available and invited to all of our events. I'll make sure that you can actually come here and do your workshops. You don't have to do anything. I will give you my space here. If you have workshops you want to do, like what we're talking about right now, I'll be glad for you to come here and do it in this space. I
was
can
gonna say,
I
we
can
do.
guarantee. I hope so, because this center, and let me just say it, I gotta go for this because y'all got a lot of people to talk.
Go for it. Go for
Listen, if you support the center, right, there will be no limit to what we can do. But I have to have the community support, particularly from people such as people who are on this call, because we own the same vibe, we believe the same things, and it will be a success. And plus, it's got Dr. J. Alfred Smith's name on it, if you understand what I'm saying. All right, I ain't got to say nothing else about that. It got to be right, because he was right.
Yes,
okay,
sir.
all right.
And well, let me actually pick up there too, and I want to combine two questions in the chat, which I think are related, and I want to see if we can tackle them together. And so, Kamilah, I'm gonna start with you on this. Really, the question is about, and I'll just read it straight up. It's, there are so many people who know nothing about reparations. I'm gonna add to that, reparations in California. What can we do about this? So that's the first part, and then the second part is, what is the best way to obtain buy-in and support from Californians who do not qualify for reparations? So the first part is about, how do we raise awareness? What do we do to raise awareness? And what can you do to raise awareness? And what can those of us do to raise awareness among people who do not know about reparations in California? And then also, how do we build support among folks who are not qualifying for reparations, whether it be Black folks who are not going to qualify, which we think some 10 to 20%, maybe 10, 15, 20% of those folks who self-identify as Black or African American in California would not qualify. The remaining 80 to 90% of us would, but those 10 or so, 10, 20% or so who are not descendants of persons who were enslaved in the United States. So whether it's those folks, or whether it's folks who are of other ethnicities, other races, how do we build support from those folks? So Kamilah, any of those pieces you want to touch on?
Yes, so on the first question, how do you just generally raise awareness? One, the task force, we had a public education committee that, even though the task force is over, one of the recommendations was to, develop a curriculum based on the task force's final report for high school students. And we actually have commissioned, through the recommendation of member Jovan Scott Lewis, Dr. Travis J. Bristow, who is a professor at UC Berkeley, to lead that effort. So I know that's coming, but that's just one aspect of the work. You got to join organizations like CJEC and continue to, stay engaged with Allen Temple Baptist Church. You have to, just share the word with your networks. And, there's things coming down the pipeline, I promise, where, raising awareness will seem to be more, publicized and accelerated as we, approach this legislative phase. The second one was, what about people who aren't eligible? How do you get some buy-in from them? First, again, I'll just talk about things that were done first during the life of the task force. So one of the things that were done was the creation of a website called supportreparations.org. That's a website that was organized by member Don Tamaki primarily. And that's a repository of different organizations, including Black organizations, but mostly non-Black organizations who are in support of reparations. I know Chris is in connection with Rising Communities, organization that primarily serves Black and Brown folks. And so there's going to have to be a concerted effort over the next 6 to 8 months. And luckily, connections have already been established during the life of the task force, but those connections are going to have to continue to flourish over the next 6 to 8 months to really get buy-in from, people who would not necessarily be eligible for this. So I have a lot of different ideas on that, but for now, I'll just leave it there.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I think that's that's absolutely, I think, what we want to be uplifting, right? So what the task force has done to help educate the public, by the way, one of the three, I think, core missions of the State Reparations Task Force was and is to educate the public. The way we teach this when we do community meetings and community town halls on California reparations is we usually say something like, the State Reparations Task Force, which started its work in 2021, had 2 years to do 3 things. So 2 years to do 3 things. The first thing was to study reparations with a particular focus on what California is responsible for. The second thing, and this is to the question, is to educate the public or bring knowledge to the people, as I usually say. And then the third thing is to do what we're talking about largely today, which is to make some final recommendations, some final proposals for reparations, and then to give those recommendations to the state Senate, to the state assembly, and the governor to consider for reparations legislation. Dr. Evans, I want to give you some time to speak on that too. Just your thoughts. One, what do you think we can do? And let's talk more broadly now, outside of the faith community. What do you think we can do to raise more awareness among folks who do not know about reparations in California? And then also, how do you think buy-in or support can be built among folks who would not be eligible for reparations?
That's a very good question. Let me begin with the latter part about people who are not eligible for reparations. So to be very technical for a moment, the numbers belie the fact that they've already had reparations for an entire, since, I mean, their legacy, et cetera, et cetera. And the justice motif. Now, we're not going to win everyone. I talked to a fellow yesterday, interestingly enough, who works over at Cal Berkeley. He's a nice guy, but he wasn't feeling what I was talking about. And so I don't know if he will ever come to that or not. And the point I make is that we cannot wait for everyone to get it. If they don't get it, they don't get it. That does not mean that we not pursue the justice that we are rightly deserve. Secondly, podcast. If everyone here is eligible, well, not eligible, but you are capable, actually, brilliantly so, to create your own podcast and to talk about these issues. Secondly, I would ask you to create, let me tell you something I learned. The reason, in one of my books I researched, one of the reasons why our Jewish brothers and sisters were able to get reparations, one reason, not all reasons, they had one script and they all followed it. They never spoke anywhere where part of that script was not recited for why they were to receive reparations. And so we really have to create a similar narrative and script to speak about. Thirdly, most people on this particular session can write an editorial. There are zillions of papers that you can write in, and I would suggest write in the African-American papers across the country, because in real terms, like, the paper here in Oakland, for example, I always read that. I always read that because I get to find things in that paper that I'm not going to find in the mainstream papers that are relevant to us, right? And to write op-eds in those particular types of journals, et cetera, is vital. I would say to the attorneys, and I don't know who else is on here because I don't know, but I'm just using you all as an example. There are certain journals that you could be writing legal opinions or legal articles about this. And I would suggest and urge you to do that. So that's just some of the things. And then finally, you got to have public meetings, whether it's in a barbershop, I don't care where it is, but wherever we gather, we should be sharing the information on why this is important. And that's just some of the examples I can give you at the top of my head.
Thank you. Now, I think all those are really, really right. I was thinking about, the work that we've done here at CJAC, I mean, one of our core objectives is to raise awareness and support in California for California reparations. That's objective number one for us. Objective number two, or 1A, is to, in 2024, and I'll talk more about this in a few, is to enact the first ever state reparations law in U.S. history. And it's those two things that are really top of mind for me. I mean, I go to sleep to those two things. I wake up to those two things. And to the question here, and actually I want to get to one or two more questions here before we go into the end of our discussion for this hour. But of course, as we're talking about, the discussion continues, and this is, I think, partly to the answer to the question that we're talking about now, and that Dr. Evans, I think, is speaking on very rightly, and also Chair Moore also, which is something that we put in our newsletters that we put out every month on California reparations, and that is to put reparations in your conversations. That's the phrase that we use: put reparations in your conversations. So I'm speaking to everyone here. Everyone here, I think, has an opportunity, and I'm going to dare say right now, the obligation to start talking about reparations with your friends, with your loved ones, et cetera, et cetera. Put reparations in your conversations. There are 40 million plus people in California. Millions of people have heard about California's reparations task force and reparations in California, but more need to know, and more need to hear about it. And every one of us has the opportunity, the obligation, the responsibility to play a role in actually making that happen. I want to get to one of the other questions here and talk about, and let's just go right to it. What are some of the biggest obstacles to reparations in California? What do you think, and Kamilah, I'll come to you on this one to start. What do you think are some of the biggest obstacles to reparations becoming real in California?
I'll just briefly say ignorance. And I say that because it's like, even my fear, not fear, my concern is like, even with the education of the public, people will remain ignorant. Like, I'll give an example. I was chatting with someone online, someone who's non-Black, who said, California never had slaves. I broke down the whole history for him, and he still concluded, okay, California never had slaves. But I'm like, but I gave you all these sources. So I'm like, that's kind of, to me, potentially indicative, where even if you do have this like broad-based, public education campaign, there might still just be people who are just anti-Black, who are just racist, who really just don't want to see, in particular, descendants of slaves achieve upward mobility, don't want to see our quality of life improve. But hey, that's been the position of a critical mass of folks since this country's inception. That has not stopped our ancestors or us for fighting for our civil and human rights and for what we're owed. So, I mean, I think that's one of the obstacles, but that's been an obstacle, but that has never been a real true obstacle for our community. So I remain optimistic, and I know we're going to get reparations.
If I could say this in a room full of believers, damn right. Okay. Also, to your point, Kamilah, I think it's true, and I think this is important for folks to hear too. I think you raised a great point. Education is going to be very helpful and necessary. It's not going to be enough, though. Education is going to be helpful, necessary. We have to educate more folks. There will be folks who, once they know more and learn more, will become supporters if they're not already supporters. But education is not going to be enough. And I think education is actually important for the folks who are already supporters too. As you know, Kamilah and Dr. Evans, and I know a lot of folks here know, there is already a very public miseducation on reparations campaign, very alive and very well, that is active in California. California is really the target of that. Mm-hmm. And so while education will be helpful in fighting that and winning that, and helping us be successful at reparations legislation, it's not going to be enough. And it's also important that those of us who are supporters actually are armed with the kind of education that we need to combat ideas like, hey, there was no slavery in California, which is not true. There was slavery in California. Maureen talked about the research that she did earlier today in leading up to creating the Reparations Task Force bill. The State Reparations Task Force uncovered that there were over, I think, 1,000, if not 2,000, African Americans enslaved in the state of California. Dr. Evans, you spoke about your own family's history, and here at the coalition, we have the privilege and the pleasure and the honor and the blessing of working with folks who are living descendants of folks who were enslaved right here in the state of California as well. Dr. Evans, I want to give you some time here to talk about what you think might be one or two or some of the biggest obstacles you think that we should be paying attention to in our way as we then overcome them toward reparations.
Well, thank you. Let me say this. There are three things that I would ask you to consider. The first thing, I would like our attorneys and to pay attention to what I consider to be another reason why affirmative action was attacked. And I think it has to do with the fact that reparations is advancing. And the Supreme Court, appellate courts, every other court in the country knows it. Political pundits know it. Politicians know it. I don't know if they can stop it, but they're going to try to slow it down. Affirmative action is key in reparations. So if you talk about property law, or you talk about racial capitalism, then affirmative action is attached to a federal reparations claim. So if you don't have affirmative action, then any conservative judge may say that, well, there's no more affirmative action, so you can't file or win a federal case or even a state level case for reparations because reparations has been attached to affirmative action. So I would like for our attorneys to do work for us to help us understand better if that is to be overcome. I also think that the 13th Amendment overcomes all of it, attorneys and history professors and all of you. If I read the 13th Amendment correctly as the only justification necessary for reparations, I don't know if you need anything else. But I think that I would like for our Black attorneys and sympathetic attorneys to make sure that we understand those issues, right? Number two, I propose, and I didn't go to an HBCU, but I taught at one. So I'm not saying that where some of us made choices to go to school. And I'm going to be honest, I made a choice to go to school because I was the first person in my family to go to school. I went where I could. I just want to make that clear. I went where the door was open for me many, many years ago. But what if, let's do a what if very quickly. What if, let's say young people are graduating from high school in 2023. All African Americans who aspire, all African Americans who are eligible to go to somebody's college. And let us say from 2023 through 2028. So that's what, roughly 5 years or something like that. Let's say all Black kids who are eligible to go to college refuse to go to a PWI and they go all to an HBCU. How would that profoundly affect the country? How would that affect funding? How would that affect dollars? I would argue that PWIs don't have the students they used to have, but they have resources. We have aspiring students, but we don't have resources. But if we refuse, in other words, to put on a W.E.B. Du Boisian strike, I got it right here on my shelf here. It's a book called The Black Reconstruction. And on page 3 of The Black Reconstruction, Du Bois said if all enslaved people saw themselves as workers and all went on strike the same day, slavery would have ended that day. So why don't we just end it? We don't have to participate. We have HBCUs. And we could flood those HBCU with students and the market will follow immediately because they have to make money. That's number two. And then number three, we have to work on our own people, as you have said, Chris, in one of your previous questions, and Attorney Moore answered. But I'm not so much interested right now in the emotional difficulty of white folks to understand why we need reparations. That's not my issue right now. I think we have to do a large narrative changing, psychological, soul-searching process toward our own people who do not think they deserve reparations. So we have to do a lot of work in the house, right? So that our people understand that this is not something that, see, because you've had double consciousness, right? If you have double consciousness, you always think about what the oppressor wants you to think before you think what's right for yourself. So we must decolonize, deconstruct our minds in order for us to achieve what we need to achieve. So those three things. Number one, we need the lawyers to look at the loopholes that they're trying, not even a loophole, but you understand what I mean. Find the right path for us legally to advance, and you all write about these things. Secondly, we can have a general strike, an education strike. We can have online strikes. We can literally target companies now and say, we're not buying things from you, and literally strike. And I think of 3A is that all Black folks, you need to have a passport. Tell everybody in your church, everybody in your barbershop, whether you plan to travel anywhere or not, I want you to have a passport, because we could literally say, okay, so you're going to try to mess with us. We want everybody in LA on that day to leave the country, preferably go to the Caribbean, preferably go to one of our countries and use your money into that market, so that you can leverage your economic power to demonstrate we can mobilize at any time. We don't have to play ball with you anymore. Okay, that's number 3A or whatever. And then finally, we got to work on our own minds. And if you look at it, I heard the word intersection, and I like that in academics and law, and certainly in theology. All the things I just talked about, they intersect. All of those things intersect. Healing of the mind, agency to protest, which demonstrates we are equal and human to everybody else. And all of those ways we can move forward our agendas.
Thank you for that, Dr. Evans. I actually I'll pick up on a couple of those things that I want to check us on time here. I will be passing the mic back to our host here, because we will be concluding the panel, but I do want to just add a couple of thoughts here and then just give folks an overview really quickly of what's coming next. So to the points here again, the question around what are some of the biggest obstacles, I think there are a few, but to the piece that we just talked through right now, I think, and I want to congratulate the attorneys and the legal scholars that work with the task force, and that will continue hopefully to be working with the legislature next on, how to make reparations real. And I think we have a really good idea about how to do that, which is to design our reparations recommendations, as the task force has done, by lineage and not by race. That way we do not offend the California and U.S. Constitution, and then also to the points around what our agency is. I think we have a lot of agency as a people, and I think we will, especially as we can start to and will be able to start to targeting that agency around putting pressure on our legislators and our elected officials to make reparations legislation real in 2024. And I think that's a perfect segue really to talk lastly in the last 30 seconds here that I have about what's coming next. Okay, so generally speaking, and this is for the folks listening here now and who will listen, generally speaking, there are three big things coming next, three big phases in our work coming next. The first thing that's going to happen next is that a reparations bill or bills will be written and then introduced into the California state legislature. And that's going to be a first of its kind ever. That's never have happened before. I expect that will happen. So the writing of the bill or bills, and then the introducing of the bills, between now and let's say the end of the year. Okay. That then will take us to the next big thing that's going to happen, which is that the bills will start to move through the California legislature toward passage by the state Senate and the state assembly. And I expect that work to begin and successfully end between the winter and the spring of next year also. We will need a majority of the state Senate and a majority of the state assembly to say yes. So that means we will need at least 41 state assembly members and at least 21 state senators to say yes on one or more reparations bills in 2024. And then after that, the third big thing, and this is the end here, the third big thing will be to get the bills that are passed and approved signed by the governor. And so we will need one governor's signature. And I think we could rightfully expect that to happen sometime in the summer to late summer of 2024, if and when we are successful. So we have something we call the reparations equation. It's 41 plus 21 plus 1. 41 assembly members, 21 senators, and 1 governor equals reparations in 2024. Reverend Jeremy, I'm going to pass it back to you. I want to thank my panelists here. Appreciate you. And thank you all for listening.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. A lot of meat. And I'm from the South. We say good meat makes its own gravy. So I'm not going to try to do any summary and preach again. But to our amazing, amazing panelists, to Brother Chris, Dr. Evans, Attorney Moore, and our dear sister Maureen, she had to hop off, so that's why you didn't hear her, engaged in the conversation. But thank you all for your spirit. Thank you all for your vision and your clarity in this work, and for really mobilizing us to really advocate and to incorporate this into our livelihoods. And Dr. Evans, to we are who we've been waiting for. Our liberation is on us. So to that intersectionality of oppression means there has to be an intersectionality when it comes to solutions and to community building. So it's just an amazing job. Just wow, I am full. But I want to keep it in this vein. I know Sister Carol, you have some ways to get involved. I know we were gonna have you a little bit after. Are you ready now, since you're coming off of, since Chris kind of gave us our mandate? I wanted to just stay in the vein of other ways that people can get involved. Sister Carol?
Yes, I am ready. I am so fired up by these wonderful conversations that we've been having. And I'll just start with myself individually. This is one way people can get involved. I'm actually lucky enough to be retired, and my day consists of, I have our flyers and I just walk through my life. And as I approach people, I talk to them about reparations. I hand them a flyer. I encourage them to get involved. And while everyone doesn't have the luxury of doing this all day, we can always, like someone said earlier, we can always reach out and speak to our family, our friends, and just educate them around the reparations movement and how they can participate. Another thing that you can all do is sign up for our website, which is cjec-official.com. There you can sign up for our monthly newsletter, and you will have all the pertinent, relative, true, factual information about what is happening with the task force and other community events. Another way that people can get involved, and this is going to be a long process, is when we start lobbying our legislatures, be involved in phone banking or texting, and remind our legislatures that 24 is an election year, and if they might want to consider their answer around the reparations questions if the answer is no. So also, I like to invite everyone to just have conversations with everyone that you know and who is interested. And also, we have contingencies of CJEC throughout the state. So if you live in Sacramento area, we have a contingency there. If you live in the Bay Area, we have a contingency here. If you live in Southern California, we have a contingency there. So we are a widespread grassroots organization, and all of us are just regular people. We don't necessarily have any special reparations related skills. We just saw a need for communication and to move this movement forward, and we just jumped on the bandwagon. And I do want to also include that many of the CJEC volunteers are welcome with open arms. From my first day, I felt very welcome becoming a part of this organization, who has encouraged me and motivated me to do even more. So another way that we can become engaged is speak to our congregations. That's the main thing for now, to just educate everyone that we know. And also take a moment out of your time to educate someone. Take a moment out of your time to become educated about what is happening. So those are some of the things that I think that everyone here could participate in. Just like they say, when it's time to tithe, this is a situation where everyone can participate. So we don't really need any direction from a higher power or from a group. We can, as individuals, move this movement forward. So I think that those are some main things that we can do to move this ahead. And I definitely appreciate any other comments about how people can get involved and participate. But the main thing I do want to express is going to take all of us, the whole community, to make this happen. And that means each of us here, people that aren't here, we just need to keep it moving. And I'm very, very optimistic, in spite of a lot of naysayers that I speak to. If we put all our energy behind this movement, we can and will be successful. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sister Carol. She has been a warrior and has been guiding us and making moments like these possible. And I was praising the panelists, but also again to Rowena Brown for setting the tone for us. Thank you again. And so now we are going to pivot. We want to hear from our partnering orgs, as I said in the beginning. So firstly, we're going to have the president of the Oakland chapter of the NAACP, Ms. Cynthia Adams, who I think will be coming through Dr. Ellie Whitehurst's feed.
Thank you, Reverend Jeremy. I am not Cynthia Adams. Cynthia Adams is here in Boston at the National NAACP convention. And she just wants to let everyone know that the Oakland branch of the NAACP is ready to continue partnering with Allen Temple, with the chamber, with others to move this work forward. The NAACP is the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. And so the work continues with reparations. And so the branch is really, really excited and ready to put their sleeves up to continue to support this work.
Awesome. Thank you, President Adams. And y'all have fun in Boston for us. Looks like it's been lively up there. So thank you, President Adams, for those remarks. And it feels like we got the Adams family. I don't know if y'all are kinfolk, but we also have Miss Kathy Adams, president of the Oakland African American Chamber of Commerce. So we will hear from her now, Miss Kathy.
Well, thank you. I know we're up on the hour. I am so thankful to this entire committee. I had the opportunity to attend the meeting in Sacramento for the release of the report. And when I left, I said, hey, we have got to do something. We've got to be in alignment, and hence contacted Rowena Brown with a similar member, Mia Bonta's office. And then later we connected with Supervisor Nate Miley. So what is important, and Chris, thank you, and all of the many panelists here, I think it's very critical for the conversation. And I looked at all of the questions. And while we know reparations is more than about compensatory, but that is important. So I think the level in which we are moving to educate, to continue to amplify the message, is going to be critical. So I hope that this is the first of many conversations, and that we make sure that we reach out to any other, the affinity groups or anybody else that want to be involved, that we kind of keep it here so we're marching to the same message and that we're amplifying the same message so that we can help people to understand the entire message around reparations. In reference to some of the work and committee work that we were doing, coming up with the idea of having this 1,000-page document, that I think one of the next meetings that we could do, and we should do it here, in the method we're doing now, to have different chapters kind of talked about as you begin to teach. Because when we begin to do that, then we can have the same message, because sometimes they get it misconstrued and everybody's like, where is my check? But it's bigger than that. And we want to make sure that people understand that the message is huge and that we can make some headway. I just finally, I attended the U.S. Black Chamber of Commerce in DC, and I had the opportunity to meet the young lady out of Evanston, Illinois, where they were able to get a few millions there. So I would like to make sure, if you've not been in touch already, they do have monthly calls, and I want to make sure we share her information so that however they prepared and had the key stakeholders that work with them to move it along. So I think that my brother Chris has done an excellent job in facilitating this, bringing it all home, and having our esteemed, today is a great day to be Black looking at y'all. And I am a HBCU, JSU, originally from Mississippi, and California is my home. So I hope with Dr. Joseph Evans, we can continue. I just want to say my heart is full right now, because when I went to listen, I said, let me take my iPad. I was sort of like everybody else. And when you heard the stories and CJ Johnson, seeing her sister speak, and her mom is about 83, 84, I don't know, at our church. And it was her grandmother that was in West Oakland. So you heard real stories, but we've all been affected. And when we think about education, you don't even have to put the money in our hand. Put the money in the school so our students can go there. So there are all different ways we can do that. And I don't want to get emotional, but let's continue to fight, because even though there may be naysayers, as they say, that may not believe in what we're doing, as Black people, we don't have the luxury to like fight. We tend to be reactionary. And right now I feel like how we're being proactive with the report being released, and we jumped in, and I would be remiss not saying shout out to Dr. Allie Whitehurst. She was there, and I said, Dr. Whitehurst, we got to do something. So she took the ball running. I went this direction. Now we're all back together, and the chamber is here to be a voice of the community, to be in alignment, and to amplify the message and make sure we're all together so we don't have little silos. Let's one time do something together and let's achieve this. So thank you for the opportunity.
Woo-hoo. You're on fire today. Thank you, Miss Adams. Yes, indeed. Thank you so much. I want to, Brother Chad Brown, I see your hand raised, but unfortunately we are at time. So we ask that you use the chat. We have a little bit more, so don't everyone leave yet. But utilize the chat. We do have emails. If you have a direct and specific question to any one of our panelists, and you should have the option to direct message too if you don't want it to be a broad, open question. So we are going to pivot quickly into our raffle. So for those who have stayed, we thank you for staying with us. We are going to do a quick raffle here. Just give me one moment. And I believe we should have everyone's emails from you registering. So I think we can just go with the first. We have 5 books to give away. So the first 5 names we get, we'll make sure we collect those, Sister DJ, and then we'll make sure we follow up with that person directly. Okay. Is everyone able to see my screen?
Yes.
Making up names. Okay, so we're all witnesses. All right, here's the first.
A little bit.
Well, I'll just read the name. I just want to let people see. Yeah, I don't believe I can make it bigger, unfortunately. John Giustelli. All right, that's what we got. So we're gonna remove that. Sister DJ, you got that? Let me see if I can make sure that we're capturing. You just give me thumbs up once you got the name, then I'll know to move forward. Hopefully she could do that. But we got John
Yes, we do. And I'm pretty sure Carol Tolliver is getting them too, right, Carol?
All right, perfect.
Yes, ma'am.
All righty. So we got John. Let's see who we have next. Gina Edwards. Gina Edwards. 2. Who's the lucky number 3? Lucky number 3. We got Ann Lomax. Ann Lomax. All right. And number 4. Ooh, that was close. Jacko Hicks. Hold on, Sam. Jacko. All right, I believe this is the last one. Lucky number 5, Antoinette Clyde, NAACP family. So you all will, we will follow with you all directly so that you can receive your gift. So that you can receive your gift. All right, make sure we're back. I think the last thing is that there will be a survey and a form that you can fill out so that you all and that we all can stay engaged to Ms. Kathy Adams' point of us not staying in silos, that we have to build bridges. We continue to have to break down walls so that we can get to each other, see each other, love on each other in spaces like this, and love in the tension, love in everything that's going to come with this work, because we know that liberation is for everybody, and that the liberation of Black folks will be the liberation of everybody else. Amen. So thank you all again for joining. I am going to close us. I'm actually going to read a scripture. It's a little lengthy, but I feel the Spirit calling me to this, just as we've been talking about this intergenerational piece. I was watching the Rainbow Push celebration of the handing off of the torch from Dr. Jesse Jackson to our own brother, Dr. Frederick Haynes III. And Justin Jones, the Tennessee representative, was talking giving remarks at that event. And he talked about how we're in a unique space of where the Moses and Joshua generation are marching together and learning how to build power together. So Spirit brought me to Joshua chapter 1, verses 3 through 9. I'm going to be reading from the interpretation of the Message Bible. And this will be our closing scripture, prayer, and centering as we leave this space together. All right, this is Joshua chapter 1, verses 3 through 9. And this is the Message Bible, the interpretation known as the Message Bible. The word of God reads as such. After the death of Moses, the servant of God, God spoke to Joshua, Moses' assistant. Moses, my servant is dead. Get going. Cross the Jordan River, you and all the people. Cross to the country I'm giving to the people of Israel. I am giving you every square inch of the land you set your foot on, just as I promised Moses. From the wilderness and this Lebanon east to the great river, the Euphrates River, all the Hittite country, and then west to the great sea, it is all yours. All your life, no one will be able to hold out against you. In the same way I was with Moses, I will be with you. I won't give up on you. I won't leave you. Strength, courage. We are going to lead this people to inherit the land that I promised to give their ancestors. Give it everything you have, heart and soul. Make sure you carry out the revelation that Moses commanded you, every bit of it. Don't get off track, either left or right, so as to make sure you get to where you're going. And don't for a minute let this book of the Revelation be out of mind. Ponder and meditate on it day and night, making sure you practice everything written in it. Then you'll get to where you're going. Then you will succeed. Have not I commanded you? Strength, courage. Don't be timid. Don't get discouraged. God, your God, is with you every step you take. May the Lord add a blessing to the reading, hearing, and most of all, carrying out of God's word. Amen.
Amen.
So enjoy this beautiful weather. We will be in touch. And yes, the journey continues towards reparations. Go in peace.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
God bless you.
Bye.
Goodbye, y'all. I don't think we should debrief on this slide. So we'll just circle back, Dr. Alley. You're on mute. Let me just stop recording.